You hit a registry hit until after placement.
It was procedure.
That's fraud. $6 million.
The judge didn't look at the baby first. He looked at the paper. A single page, creased, coffee-stained at the corner, stamped confidential in red, held up under the courtroom's document camera like it was radioactive. On the screen, everyone could read the line that shouldn't have existed. Do not disclose putative father registry. Hit until after placement. A murmur moved through the gallery, not loud but sharp. The kind of sound people make when they realize a story they believed is about to change. Tanya Lawson sat at the plaintiff's table with both hands wrapped around a tissue that had already turned soft and wrinkled. Her eyes were locked on the screen, unblinking, like blinking might make it disappear. Beside her, her husband Eric stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, shoulders rigid. He looked like a man trying to hold up a house from the inside while the foundation cracked. Across the aisle, the adoption agency's director, Dana Whitaker, sat, with 2 attorneys and a face so composed it felt practiced. She wore a navy blazer, hair smooth, posture calm. The kind of calm that makes you look respectable right up until the paperwork speaks. Judge Marisol Bennett leaned forward. "Ms. Whitaker," she said, voice even, "is this an internal agency email?" Dana's lips parted. "Your Honor, Judge Bennett lifted a hand. "No," she said. "Answer the question." Dana swallowed. "Yes," she admitted. "It appears to be." Judge Bennett's gaze didn't soften. "And does your agency routinely instruct staff to conceal legal risk from intended adoptive parents?" Dana's attorney stood quickly. "Objection, argumentative." Judge Bennett didn't blink. "Overruled," she said. "The question goes to intent." Tanya's breath caught. Eric's hands tightened on the edge of the table. Judge Bennett tapped the screen once with her pen. "Because," she continued, "what this document suggests is not a clerical mistake." The courtroom held its breath. "It suggests a plan," Judge Bennett said. "A plan to move a child into a home while withholding information that could trigger a challenge to the adoption." Dana's face drained slightly, as if the room's light was pulling color away. Judge Bennett sat back, eyes hard. "And in this court," she said, "plans like that are called fraud." A pause, then the sentence that made Tanya's throat tighten like a fist. "This court enters judgment for the plaintiffs in the amount of $6 million. The words hung in the air. $6 million. Not as a lottery, not as a reward, as a price tag on a family's fear, months of waking up wondering if a knock on the door would take their child away. Judge Bennett continued, voice steady. Restitution of fees, compensatory damages for harm, punitive damages for willful concealment, attorney's fees. Dana Whitaker stared down at Suor, her hands like she'd never seen them before. Tanya didn't cry loudly, she just put her palm over her mouth and shook her head, like her body couldn't decide whether to collapse or survive. Eric's shoulders dropped a fraction, the first sign of relief he'd shown in a year. Because the money wasn't the point was the record, the court saying, out loud, that what happened to them wasn't bad luck, it was engineered, and if you're wondering how an adoption agency ends up accused of fraud, how paperwork becomes the weapon that exposes everything, how a family goes from hopeful applicants to plaintiffs in a $6 million verdict, you have to rewind. Back to the day, Tanya and Eric walked into an agency office, believing they were about to become parents. Back to the promise that sounded simple. We'll take care of everything. What you're about to hear is a fictionalized composite story, built from patterns that appear again and again in adoption litigation, rushed timelines, hidden risks, paperwork that doesn't match reality, and families left holding the consequences. Names, locations, and details have been changed to protect privacy. But the anatomy of the situation, the way it unfolds, the way it hurts, will feel painfully familiar to anyone who has lived near the adoption system. Tanya Lawson wanted a child the way some people want air, not as a preference, as a pulse. She and Eric had spent 7 years trying. At first, it was optimistic tracking apps and vitamins and whispered conversations in the dark. Then it became appointments, procedures, words that felt like cold tools, unexplained infertility, low ovarian reserve, 2 failed rounds of IVF that drained their savings and their faith at the same time. By the time Tanya turned 36, she had learned how to smile through disappointment so well that even she sometimes believed it. Eric was steady through it until he wasn't. He never blamed Tanya, but grief has a way of turning inward. Sometimes he would sit in the garage after work with the lights off, just staring at nothing, like his mind was somewhere else trying to bargain with reality. One night, after another negative test, Tanya said the sentence that broke the stalemate. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered. "I'm losing myself." Eric nodded slowly. Then he said, "What about adoption?" The word landed softly at first. Then it grew. Hope does that. It starts small and then fills space. They researched agencies the way desperate people research miracles. Reviews, testimonials, glossy brochures full of smiling families. They landed on one that looked reputable. Brightbridge Family Services, modern office, warm colors, photos of babies on the walls, a waiting room that smelled like vanilla and new carpet. The coordinator who greeted them wore a calm smile and a name tag that said, Kira. "We've helped hundreds of families," she said. "We're ethical, we're thorough, we protect everyone." Protect. That word mattered, because Tanya and Eric didn't just want a baby, they wanted a baby without a nightmare attached. Kira walked them through the process. Home study, profile book, matching, fees. It was expensive. "Adoption is an investment," Kira said gently. Eric flinched at the word, investment. But Tanya squeezed his hand. They were already invested, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Money was just another form of bleeding. They signed. They paid an initial fee. They started the home study. A social worker visited their house, asked about childhoods, finances, marriage stability. Tanya answered honestly. Eric answered carefully. They were approved. They became waiting parents, and waiting is its own kind of torture. 3 months later, Brightbridge called. "We have a situation," Kira said, voice bright. "A match. A pregnant woman named Sierra, 23, due in 8 weeks. "She chose you," Kira said. "She loved your profile." Tanya sat down so fast her knees hit the couch. Eric's breath caught. They held each other in the living room like they were afraid the news might run away. Brightbridge moved fast, too fast, but Tanya didn't recognize that yet. They were invited to a video call with Sierra. Sierra appeared on screen in a dim room, hair pulled back, face tired but gentle. "Hi," she said softly. Tanya's voice cracked. "Hi." Sierra asked them simple questions. "Do you have pets? Do you live near a park? Will the baby have cousins?" Tanya answered with tears in her eyes, trying to sound calm while her heart hammered. Eric said, "We have so much love to give." Sierra nodded slowly. "I want my baby safe," she said. "I want her loved." Tanya promised, "She will be." After the call, Kira praised Sierra's bravery. "She's making a plan," Kira said. "Everything is going smoothly." Then Kira mentioned the father. "A biological father?" Eric asked. Kira smiled. "He's not involved," she said quickly. "Sierra doesn't know where he is. We'll handle the legal part." Handle the legal part. That should have been a warning. Instead, It sounded like relief. Tanya didn't want complicated. She wanted clean. So she accepted the sentence and moved forward. Brightbridge requested birth mother expenses to be paid into escrow. Rent, groceries, maternity clothes, transportation. Tanya and Eric agreed. They wired money. They did it willingly because they wanted Sierra stable. They wanted the baby safe. They also didn't want to risk Sierra changing her mind because she couldn't pay rent. That's the quiet pressure baked into private adoption. You're told it's voluntary, but you can feel the leverage in every bill. The weeks before the birth were a blur. Tanya painted a nursery a soft green. Eric assembled a crib, tightening every bolt twice. They attended a parenting class. They bought tiny pajamas and arranged them in drawers like sacred objects. Brightbridge sent updates. Sierra texted occasionally through the agency app. Baby kicked today. Feeling tired. Doctor says everything looks good. Tanya saved every message like proof that this was real. Then, 3 days before Sierra's due date, Kira called again. Small update, she said. We'll need an additional legal fee. There's a paperwork issue. Eric's stomach dropped. What kind of issue? Kira's smile could be heard through her voice. Nothing major, she said. Just procedural. The father's information is incomplete. We'll file a notice. Eric frowned. Is there a father? Kira laughed lightly. Technically, there's always a father, she said. But he's not involved. Tanya felt unease flicker. Are we safe? She asked quietly. Kira's tone softened. You're safe, she said. Trust us. Trust us. Tanya did, because she didn't know what trusting wrong would cost. Sierra went into labor on a stormy night. Tanya and Eric drove to the hospital with their hands shaking on the steering wheel, the city lights blurred by rain. They arrived to find Sierra already in a delivery room. Brightbridge's on-call liaison met them in the hallway and said, Everything is on track. Tanya was allowed into the room briefly, with Sierra's permission. Sierra looked exhausted, face slick with sweat, eyes shining with fear and determination. You're here, Sierra whispered. Tanya nodded, tears spilling. We're here. Eric stood in the doorway, hands clasped, trying not to look like he was breaking. At 2:41 a.m., the baby was born. A girl, small, loud, perfect. They named her Lyla, a name Tanya had carried in her heart for years. Sierra held the baby first, crying quietly, whispering things no one else could hear. Then she nodded toward Tanya. Come, Sierra said. Tanya stepped forward like she was walking into a different life. She held the baby and felt warmth and weight and a tiny heartbeat against her chest. Eric's face crumpled. He pressed his hand over his mouth. We're going to take care of you, he whispered to the baby. 2 days later, paperwork was signed. Consent forms, medical releases, placement agreement. A notary came in, a social worker watched. Brightbridge assured them everything was complete. They brought Lyla home. They introduced her to grandparents. They sent pictures. They slept in 2-hour bursts and woke up smiling anyway. For 3 weeks, their life felt like a miracle. Then the letter arrived. It came by certified mail, a plain white envelope stamped with the county seal. Eric opened it at the kitchen table, the baby sleeping in a bassinet nearby. He could read the first line and felt his stomach drop. Notice of petition to establish paternity and contest adoption. Tanya saw Eric's face and knew instantly. What? She whispered. Eric's voice was hoarse. There's a man, he said. He's claiming he's the father. The name in the letter was Jeremiah Cole. He had filed through the court within the statutory window. He claimed he had registered with the putative father registry. He claimed he had tried to contact Sierra. He claimed he had not been notified of an adoption plan. He claimed he wanted custody. Tanya's hands went numb. Eric's breathing turned shallow, because in that moment, the baby in the bassinet wasn't just their baby. She was suddenly evidence in a legal war. They called Brightbridge immediately. Kira answered, calm, almost annoyed. "Oh," she said. That, Eric repeated, voice sharp. "A man is trying to take our child." Kira sighed. "It's a scare tactic," she said. "He's probably bluffing. We'll handle it." Tanya's voice trembled. "Why didn't you tell us there was risk?" Kira's tone hardened. "There's always risk," she said. "Adoption isn't a guarantee. You knew that." Eric clenched his jaw. No. They knew there were emotions. They didn't know there were hidden legal bombs. Kira told them to send another $12,000 for emergency counsel. Tanya stared at the phone. Emergency counsel. More money, more fear. They paid because what else could they do? Their child was sleeping in the next room. The court issued a temporary order. The baby could remain with the Lawsons pending hearing, but the adoption finalization would be delayed. Delayed. That word became Tanya's nightmare. It meant their family was not secure. It meant any day could change everything. Eric began sleeping with his phone on his chest, like it was armor. Tanya jumped every time someone knocked on the door. They stopped posting photos online. They stopped answering unknown numbers. They lived inside a bubble of dread while trying to be normal parents to a newborn. Brightbridge remained strangely calm. Too calm. They kept saying, "Don't worry." They also kept billing. Eric started asking sharper questions. "How did he know?" Eric demanded. "How did he file so fast?" Tanya asked. Kira's answers were vague. "He found out somehow. People talk. Birth mothers get pressured. Not our fault. Not our fault." That phrase lodged in Tanya's mind like a splinter. Because if it wasn't their fault, why did it feel like they had set the stage? That's when Eric did something he'd resisted until then. He hired his own attorney, separate from Brightbridge, a woman named Nina Park, quiet, ruthless with paperwork, the kind of lawyer who didn't smile unless something was real. Nina reviewed their file and immediately frowned. "This is incomplete," she said. Eric blinked. "What do you mean?" Nina tapped a page. "This due diligence affidavit," she said, "claims the father is unknown and unable to be located, but there's no record of a registry search, no certified mail attempt, no investigator report." Tanya's throat tightened. Maybe they forgot? Nina's eyes stayed steady. "Agencies don't forget the part that can destroy an adoption," she said. That sentence made the room go cold. Nina filed discovery requests. Brightbridge resisted. Nina subpoenaed the agency file directly. Brightbridge objected. The judge compelled production, and that's when the paperwork started talking. The first thing Nina found was timing. A putative father registry search had been run, but it was dated 2 weeks after the baby was placed with the Lawsons. After placement, not before. That alone was damning, because it suggested Brightbridge had prioritized getting the baby into the home, creating emotional leverage before cleaning the legal risk. Then Nina found an internal note a case manager had written, "Registry hit, J. Cole, advise Dinah." Dana, the director. There was an email from Dana Whitaker, 2 lines long. "Proceed. Do not disclose. We can resolve if he surfaces." Tanya stared at the email when Nina showed them. Her body went cold. "They knew," she whispered. Eric's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. "They knew and didn't tell us," he said. Nina didn't comfort them with words. She did what lawyers do. She built a chain. She subpoenaed Brightbridge's escrow records. She subpoenaed communications with their in-house counsel. She subpoenaed phone logs. She subpoenaed billing statements. And slowly, the case became something bigger than a contested adoption. It became a fraud case, Because Brightbridge hadn't just cut corners, they had concealed risk to keep the transaction moving. And they had used that concealment to extract money from the Lawsons under pressure. Pay the emergency fee or lose your child. That's not a service. That's leverage. Meanwhile, the other side, the alleged birth father, Jeremiah Cole, wasn't the villain Tanya feared. When Nina deposed him, Jeremiah didn't sound like a kidnapper. He sounded like a man who had been shut out. He testified that he had registered as a putative father when Sierra told him she was pregnant. He testified he had asked Sierra to talk. He testified he had reached out to Brightbridge after hearing rumors of adoption, but was told, "There is no file under that name." He produced his registry confirmation. He produced call logs. He produced an email he sent to Brightbridge weeks before birth, asking for information. He never got a response. Tanya's stomach twisted, because she realized something sickening. Brightbridge hadn't just lied to her, and Eric. They had lied to Jeremiah, too. They had created a situation where everyone was blindsided except them. And that's how adoption becomes a battlefield. Not because people are evil, because institutions decide speed matters more than truth. The custody hearing arrived 6 months later. By then, Lyla was crawling. She had a laugh that made Tanya cry silently in the bathroom, because it was too much love attached to too much fear. In court, Jeremiah asked for parental rights and time, not immediate removal. He said he did not want to rip a baby away from the only parents she knew. He wanted recognition. He wanted contact. He wanted the truth. Tanya sat in court shaking, torn between empathy and terror, because empathy didn't change the stakes. Eric sat rigid, staring at Brightbridge's counsel table like he wanted the agency to feel what they'd done. Judge Bennett listened carefully. She ordered a mediated plan, gradual introduction, and supervised contact, contingent on the EOIGSO child's stability. She did not remove the baby from the Lawsons, not because the Lawsons won, because the child needed stability, because the law, in practice, often becomes a balancing act between rights and reality. But Judge Bennett did something else too. She ordered Brightbridge to produce full internal communications in a separate proceeding, because she had seen enough to suspect something deeper, and that's when the civil case began. The Lawsons sued Brightbridge for fraud, negligent misrepresentation, breach of fiduciary duty, and emotional distress. Brightbridge denied everything. They claimed they acted in good faith. They claimed adoption is complicated. They claimed registry hits can be ambiguous. They claimed the Lawsons were simply unfortunate. Nina Park didn't argue with their story. She dismantled it. She brought in a forensic accountant who traced the Lawsons' payments and showed how escrow funds had been commingled with agency operating accounts. She brought in a document examiner who testified that certain affidavits had been backdated, signature ink inconsistent with the date, file metadata showing documents created after the signing date. She brought in former Brightbridge staff. One employee testified, voice shaking, that they were instructed to move cases fast and handle fathers later. Another testified that Dana Whitaker kept a risk binder with sticky notes, cases where father issues existed but were managed through delay and settlement pressure. Tanya listened to that testimony and felt her skin go cold because she recognized the exact pressure they had been under. Pay the emergency fee. Don't ask questions. Trust us. And then the email, the one from the cold open, surfaced in discovery. Do not disclose putative father registry hit until after placement. That sentence was the skeleton key. It didn't just prove negligence. It proved intent. It proved strategy. It proved fraud. The trial lasted 9 days. 9 days of exhibits, testimony, and quiet horror. The jury listened to Tanya describe waking up every morning afraid her child would be taken. They listened to Eric describe being forced to choose between paying Brightbridge's fees or risking the stability of their baby's legal status. They listened to Jeremiah describe being erased. They listened to Sierra describe being confused and pressured, told, "It's handled," told, "Don't talk to him." Brightbridge tried to paint the Lawsons as overreacting. They tried to say, "Everyone knows adoption has risk." Nina's closing argument was simple. "Risk exists," she said, "but concealment is a choice." She held up the email. "This," she said, "is not risk. This is a plan." The jury returned a verdict: fraud, punitive damages, restitution, attorney fees, total $6 million. Judge Bennett entered judgment. And that's where the cold open happened, the courtroom moment where paper finally outweighed performance. After the verdict, reporters gathered outside. Tanya refused interviews. Eric refused interviews. They didn't want headlines. They wanted quiet. They went home, held Lyla, and tried to breathe like normal parents. The money didn't erase the fear. It didn't erase the months they lived with their stomachs in knots. It didn't erase the betrayal of realizing an institution had treated their family like a transaction. But it did something important. It paid for legal fees. It funded therapy. It created a trust for Lyla that Brightbridge could never touch. It also forced accountability. Brightbridge's license was suspended pending investigation. Dana Whitaker resigned. Former employees testified in related proceedings. And in the background, reforms began. Slow, imperfect, but real, because public records have a way of forcing systems to look at themselves. In the months that followed, the court finalized Lyla's adoption with additional safeguards. Jeremiah was granted structured contact, supervised at first, then gradually expanded, because the court recognized both his rights and Lyla's stability. Sierra was offered support services independent of Brightbridge, because the system finally acknowledged she had been left vulnerable too. And Tanya and Eric did the hardest thing. They stopped thinking of the situation as us versus him. They started thinking in one direction only. What does Lyla need? Lyla needed calm. Lyla needed adults who didn't lie. Lyla needed truth delivered with care. One evening, a year after the verdict, Tanya sat in Lyla's room, watching her sleep. The house was quiet. A humidifier hummed softly. Streetlight glow slid under the curtain like a thin ribbon. Eric stood in the doorway and whispered, "Do you ever think about it?" Tanya didn't ask what he meant. She nodded. "All the time," she whispered. Eric's voice was tight. "We almost lost her." Tanya's throat tightened. "We never should have been put in that position," she said. Eric nodded slowly. "Do you think they knew what they were doing?" he asked. Tanya stared at the baby monitor screen. "They wrote it down," she whispered. "So yes." Eric swallowed. "And we trusted them," he said, voice breaking. Tanya turned her head toward him. "We trusted because we wanted to believe," she said gently. "Says, that doesn't make us stupid. It makes us human." Eric exhaled, shaky. Tanya reached for his hand. "Lyla is here," she whispered. "That's what matters now." Eric nodded, and in that small moment, Tanya understood the truth of the whole case. The adoption didn't nearly fall apart because love wasn't real. It nearly fell apart because someone treated love like a product. Here's the takeaway that sits under all the legal jargon. Adoption can be beautiful. It can also be exploited, and when it's exploited, the victims aren't just adoptive parents. They're birth parents, children, families, everyone caught inside the system. Brightbridge's fraud wasn't a dramatic scam with masks. It was administrative. It was timed. It was hidden in file notes and procedural updates. It was the kind of fraud that thrives on one assumption: that nobody will read the paperwork closely until it's too late. But Tanya and Eric read it. Nina Park subpoenaed it. A judge put it on a screen. And a jury heard it. So here's a question worth sitting with. If an institution tells you, trust us, we'll handle the legal part, what does that mean? Because in Tanya and Eric's story, we'll handle it meant we'll hide it. And hiding doesn't protect families. It endangers them. The $6 million didn't buy peace. It bought accountability. It bought resources for recovery. It bought a record that made the truth undeniable. And for Tanya and Eric, that record mattered almost as much as the money, because it restored something they lost the moment that letter arrived. Their grip on reality, their confidence that they hadn't imagined the danger, their right to say, out loud, without being called dramatic, we were deceived, and we survived it, and our child is not a transaction, she is a person, and she deserved better than an agency that treated her life like a deadline.